right. Hey, Melissa. You ready to go today? All right. All right, everyone, welcome. We will go ahead and bring our meeting to order. Today is Tuesday, April the 2nd, and for our work session, we have a very long and complicated agenda. One item, Superintendent's proposed 2024-2025 budget. We have a presentation ready, and I know that board members individually have been reaching out to staff, providing many questions. We'll have a staff presentation addressing those questions and any others that you might be bringing up today. Dr. Taylor, where do you want to begin?
So I'll move with some comments, and I'll bring up David Lee and the finance staff. And so I want to thank the board for giving us this opportunity to go over the budget. As you know, this is the superintendent's proposed budget. What we've done is to prepare some items for the board to look at, and certainly some options where you can make changes, some things that we know is important to the board. We try to reflect those things that we know have to be done. And so we do want the board to know and understand that. Compensation is something that has certainly come to the board in terms of what people are looking for. We want everybody to know that there is compensation in the budget for everyone. However, if there's additional compensation that we need to do, then we all know and understand that the board, the superintendent will have to make those decisions to try and reflect that in the budget. That balances and reflects what the commissioners give us. And so we know there's still some work to be done. What we will do today is go through the questions that have been listed, and I'll let David lead that through the mechanism that you as the board chair want to use. But ultimately, we are here to work with the board to answer the questions that you have, and as we get to the next phase, to hone it down a little bit more so that we can have the board prepared to submit a budget for the county commissioner. So with that, David, I'll turn it over to you, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor. Good afternoon, board members. As you know, at your last board meeting, we presented the superintendent's proposed budget to you as an information item. This will be the first of at least 2 budget work sessions that the board will have. And as we have in the past, we will review the questions that we received from board members and staff responses at the beginning of your work session this afternoon, and then turn it back to you, Chair Haggerty, for you and the board to have ongoing discussion about any potential changes you might want to make to the superintendent's proposed budget as it works from that to become what the board will approve as a proposed board's budget. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Kimsey, who will walk through the actual document. It's loaded in Assembly for the public to access. We're just going to walk through them one at a time.
The first question was that Mr. Huey reported in the News and Observer that it would take $15.3 million to raise the teacher salary supplement by 4% and to move hourly workers to $18 an hour. And the question was, is that correct? The $15.3 million figure was one that we used in your retreat for the activity, so it was a very rough estimate, really just for the activity we were doing that day. The superintendent's proposed budget includes $9.9 million increase in local funds, and that would be the amount of local dollars needed to pay for the second year of the biennium budget, which has an estimated raise of about 3% for staff. So that part is in the superintendent's budget. That approximate 3% raise would bring our minimum wage from $17 an hour to about $17.26 per hour. To raise the locally funded salary supplement by 4% would cost an additional $7.3 million. And if we wanted to move to an $18 minimum per hour or 4% raise for non-certified staff and keep our 25-cent differential and 40-cent grade differential, it would cost an additional $7.7 million. So there's a subtotal there showing the $9.9 million already in the budget, and we would need to add an additional $7.3 for the supplement and $7.7 million for non-certified, or about $15 million more dollars, to get a total local increase of $24.9 million.
Thank you, Ms. Kinsley.
The next question was, can facilities fill existing vacancies with no new funds? Our facilities department has many positions that are paid by the building program. Those do have money under them, so they could fill all those positions. However, maintenance and operations and transportation and other positions in the facilities division that are paid by the operating budget, all of those vacancies would not have money under them because we depend on lap salaries to support our budget. And I think we've discussed that in other meetings, that we budget pretty tightly to fill positions. So not every vacancy in the operating budget has money underneath it. The third question is, what were the one-time costs regarding the HELPS program, and how will that program be funded going forward? The HELPS program has about $351,000 in the budget this year, and that was intended for 1 year only, and we were hoping to be able to expand Wake Together. The superintendent's budget does not have money specifically line item for the HELPS program, but we are hopeful that we'll be able to use federal carryover dollars from Title IV and our DSSF funds in 24-25 to be able to support that program without asking for additional local dollars. The next question, on page 82 of the budget, Tier 1 schools will revert to one intervention specialist at 50%. Is that correct? And yes, that is correct. While the ESSER-funded intervention and acceleration positions will sunset, because those were allocated to schools as one-time positions, schools will maintain their local intervention position allotments at levels in 24-25. Additional one-time intervention support will be provided to schools based on need and funding availability. The next question, can you provide a historical perspective regarding the division of funding, specifically the page in the budget that shows our state, county, other local, and federal dollars as a percent of the operating budget? So we've shown that data back for a number of years. And it looks like we're getting back closer to where we were before the pandemic. In 2004-05, our state resources were about 58% of the budget, county appropriation 27%, other local 8%, and federal 7%. As we know, during the pandemic, the federal dollars went up a percentage, and the state and county were more stable. So now that we're in 24-25, our federal is expected to be 9%. County appropriation, based on what is in the superintendent's proposed budget, so we don't know that that would be funded at this time, or that will be what is recommended, it would be 32%, and the state budget would be 54%. So those are just comparisons of the percentages over time. How many behavioral health support positions funded by ESSER? The $13.8 million in the budget proposal. How many of those are filled and staffed currently? And can we share what types of positions those are? So in the response, there's a chart, and it shows you that we had one-time behavioral health support positions, counselors, social workers, psychologists, instructional specialists, senior administrators, lead psychologists, crisis specialists, and several coaches that were assigned to the ESSER grant. 1,371.5 months of employment, which is about 137 positions that we would be transitioning to local. In addition, there were some senior administrators, directors, and instructional specialists on our Medicaid grant that are also part of the behavioral health supports that we would be migrating over to the local budget. So of those total numbers of months of employments for the positions, there's about 24 or 25 positions that are vacant. You see the vacant months of employment, 232 months in ESSER and 24 months in Medicaid. So those are normal, typical vacancy ratios. That's not high, so that's just about a normal amount that we would have vacant. The next question, at the board retreat, we discussed increasing funds for board professional development. Is such an increase included in the proposal? So although increasing funds for board professional development was discussed at the board retreat at the tables, no increase was included in the proposal. During the retreat, it was shared that each board member would be able to attend one professional development opportunity that's designated by the board, and any professional development opportunity would have to, any other professional development would have to be at the cost of the board member. Board members shared that it would be discussed as a collective group to decide how to move forward. So I think that's still something that's in discussion. The next question is very similar to the first question that we went over. The difference is, this one is asking how much it would be if we increased the supplement by 4.5% rather than 4%. Everything else in this question is the same as the first one. So again, there's $9.9 million in the budget to cost out the second year of the biennium budget. It would cost $8.5 million to increase our salary supplement for certified staff by 4.5%. And it would cost $7.7 million to move to a minimum of $18 an hour or 4% for our non-certified staff. So in this case, it would cost an additional little over $16 million to be able to add those two items to the budget. How many certified vacancies are in the system? How much money is allocated for those vacant positions? So if you look on page 12 of the superintendent's proposed budget, it shows you that the total vacancy rate for all Wake County school system positions is about 7%. The vacancy rate for teachers and instructional support positions, which are counselors, social workers, psychologists, other certified staff, is about 4%, or approximately 600 positions. Not all the positions that show as vacant are true vacancies, because some of our positions will be for additional months of employment, maybe to extend someone's time in June or early in July. So our vacancies that show in Oracle could be slightly inflated due to that. But these are pretty good average numbers. Principals sometimes strategically hold back positions and choose not to fill them for various reasons, if they're going to convert them or want to use the dollars another way. So whereas Oracle showed a teacher vacancy rate of 4%, principals reported back to Human Resources a vacancy rate of 2%. We do not budget salaries and benefits for all positions in the school system. We include salary and benefits closely aligned to the average number of filled positions. So lapse salaries and benefits occur when positions are vacant, and there's positions vacant every day, different positions, but we know that occurs all the time. So we try to keep our amount for those very closely aligned to what is filled. So if our fill rates increase, or if we move additional schools into the Restart program, meaning they get to keep their lapse salaries to try to do things to improve student achievement, those two items may cause us to ask for additional resources in the local budget, because we don't have enough to cover salaries and benefits based on what we've been using historically based on lapse. And there is an item like that in the superintendent's proposed budget. Please explain the status of positions funded by Medicaid on page 113. Are those funds going away, or do we just, such that we need to find local dollars to replace it? Medicaid funding remains stable and is not ending like the ESSER funds. Strategic decisions were made during last year's budget cycle to transition some staff onto Medicaid, primarily aimed at maintaining operational continuity and facilitating recruitment efforts. The transition of positions to Medicaid was not a permanent reliance on Medicaid. It was a temporary measure. So these positions were on ESSER. We moved some of them to Medicaid and flipped some contract dollars onto ESSER. So it's really no different than the ESSER positions that we are needing to transition to the local budget. If we're able to decrease the use of laptops and overall decrease the number of laptops that we need to service, how would that impact the number of instructional support technicians needed for the future? According to the NCDPI guidelines, the current number of instructional support technicians per device is significantly lower than the recommended ratio. It's difficult to determine the future requirements of ISTs without knowing the expected or anticipated decrease in our device fleet. However, Considering the current understaffing, it's safe to assume that even if we reduce our device fleet to 1/3 of the current count, we would still require additional technicians to meet DPI's recommended technician to device ratio. The next few questions are answered with addendums because it's a pretty lengthy answer to what was asked. One request was to provide a list of positions in all departments within the central's office that are filled and unfilled. So in our central services departments, we have positions that are truly based in a central office. The offices are either here or at Rock Quarry or in a central building. And in Oracle, we assign those a 9XX, a 9-something number digit, meaning they are central and sit centrally. We have other positions that are in a central office department, but they're serving the schools every day. So those people are out in the schools, but they report to a central office department. They're not in a school call center, they don't report to the principal. So we put 2 addendums to show those separately. The first addendum are all positions that are centrally managed but serve in the schools daily. So these would be bus drivers, school psychologists, social workers, and custodians. And if you look at addendum 1, we did a pivot table to try to sum it. It still looks like a long report, but this is much shorter than with all the positions listed. So we did a pivot table to show more of a summary level. So when you look at the top of the report, the academically or intellectually gifted department in central services has 3 coordinating teachers, which is 36 months of employment, and a 12-month psychologist. And then if you look at the second column, it shows the filled months. So in that case, they're all filled, so there's no vacancies there. So those are AIG people working in the schools but reporting centrally. If you go to the end of attachment of addendum 1, you'll see this is where some of our highest vacancy rates are. So when you look at the total number of months of employment, there's a grand total of 26,729 months of employment that are in this category. Of those, 20,306.8 are filled, or 76%. We have 6,422 vacant months, or 24%. You won't be surprised that in this category is where all of our bus drivers are, and some of our child nutrition workers, and some of the maintenance staff, where we are having a very difficult time hiring staff. So these are some of our highest vacancy rates. When you remember a few minutes ago, our overall vacancy rate is about 7%. Certified staff is about 4%. And you're seeing here the much higher percentages. Addendum 2 are the central office staff that are truly in a central office building. So if you look at the first page of Addendum 2, for example, academic advancement, in that level code, it shows that we have a chief academic officer and a secretary to the chief. So 2 12-month positions, both are filled. And then it will go department by department, showing you the number of positions and how many are filled. This runs for about 15 pages. And if you look at the end of Addendum 2, in this case, we've got 12,428 months of employment. 10,885 months are filled, or 88%. And our vacancy rate is 1,543, or 12%. So again, much higher than the average for the system, much higher than certified, but not as high a vacancy rate as the categories that we have in transportation and maintenance and areas like that. So hopefully that helps a little bit to kind of break it down. And you also see within each department the names of the positions. So that shows you what kind of positions are in each area. And that's a lot more detail than you would typically see in the budget. So that might help a bit. Addendum, let's see, the next question was revise the per pupil comparison in the superintendent's proposed budget to provide an explanation of the data. I think we talked about this in one of your previous meetings. We're going to change the page and update it because I think this will be a lot better. Addendum 3 shows you that instead of just showing the data, we're describing what it means at the top. So when we compare Wake County school system to other large districts within North Carolina, we realize there's 115 school districts in North Carolina. Wake County school system has the largest student membership in the state. We serve 11.6% of the students in the state. And despite being the largest district, We rank low, 114 out of 115 districts in per pupil expenditure of state funds, and 106 out of 115 districts in expenditures of federal funds. The primary reason for this is the state provides additional funding to small and low-wealth districts. Some of our funding formulas have a base allotment distributed to all districts regardless of size. And for those reasons, funding does not follow the student in terms of distribution across the different counties in the state. The chart at the bottom compares Wake County School System with other large districts in the country. And the data is a little bit older, but this is the most recent year available on the resource that we use, so we're consistent. So in 2021, it shows that Wake County School System has a much lower per pupil spending than other districts that are similar in size. So what this shows is that Wake County taxpayers are paying less per student than other large districts across the country. Cost of living can factor into this, but basically it shows, we're a strong school district, high performing, but the cost is less per student than other areas that are similar. And then the last question, this wasn't a question. This is us trying to provide you a tool that you might be able to use for changes that you may want to consider to the superintendent's proposed budget. So if you look at Addendum 4, what we tried to do is take the county, the local portion of the superintendent's budget, anything supported by the county appropriation and other local sources are in those first few columns. So we took the increase in the county appropriation, the $58 million, and we put it into two columns, local must and local optional. And local must is what we put in that column, and you could disagree with that, but we just did our best start for you. So what we put in the must column are things that are required by legislation, such as we have to pay a flow through to the charters. We don't have a choice about that. We included things that were implemented by previous board action. So you've already approved a living extra duty salary schedule that is just each year based on the beginning teacher pay. So since that was already a decision in place, we said it's a must. If it was something that was based on reliable variables, we know we're opening a new school. We know we have one school with a calendar change. We know we have student membership projections. If we had a reliable estimate of property cost increases, like our insurance cost or our lease cost, we left that in the must column. Or if we have a reliable estimate that revenue changes are going to happen. We know indirect cost is likely to decrease because the ESSER funds are going away. And then the removal of one-time costs stayed in the must column. Everything else that's in the superintendent's budget went into the optional column. So what you'll see in the optional column on the second page of Addendum 4, everything in program continuity. For example, the building substitutes do not have to stay with the district, but if we don't continue the building subs, we would need $4 million because we would still need substitutes to cover those absences. So you'll see on that line, we put $4 million in the must column, the difference of $3.5 million in the optional. And you'll see the other items that are in program continuity, we put those in the optional column, including the behavioral health support positions. But also remember that in both of those categories with filled positions, if you make decisions not to put them in the proposed budget, we would likely be in a reduction in force because we would have positions going away that have staff in them. I did leave the early college programming, $750,000, in the must column because we feel like we are going to need resources to support that endeavor. And then the other things in the optional column, if you look at the third page of that spreadsheet at the very bottom, remember we told you that in new or expanding program, even though many things have been requested, the only thing that we were able to leave in the superintendent's budget were 3 positions for human resources. So one is shown at the bottom of page 3, and the other 2 are at the top of page 4. And then in the revenue section, we left the decrease in parking fees of $213,000 in the optional column, because you could choose to leave parking fees at the current rate which will put resources back in the budget. There are some gray columns over to the side. We worked for months with the superintendent and his team to prepare the superintendent's budget. Every week, changes were made. What's in the gray column were the last things we removed from the budget. So not everything that was requested, but those last things. So it shows those coming off. They are not in the superintendent's proposed budget. But some of those things you've been asking questions about, like on the first page, increasing the supplement for our teachers by 4.5%. You'll see the 8.5 million over in the gray column. So if you wanted to move that into the budget, it would show you that's the amount we would increase in our county appropriation. So at the very last page, the summary at the bottom shows the must column at $36.4 million, the optional column at $21.9 million. The sum of those is the $58.3 million in the superintendent's budget. So all those things are in the superintendent's proposed budget. If you were to add everything in the gray column, which you won't, but if you did, just to show you how worksheet works, it would add another $34 million, bringing the total increase in county appropriation to $92.7 million, or a 16% increase. So that's just a way to show you some things and some figures that you might need to know as you're considering what you might want to change.
Thank you, Terry. We did receive questions just today, I believe, and yesterday from 2 additional board members. We are in the process of developing responses, and we will formally bring those to you at your next work session, excuse me, in 2 weeks. But as soon as we have the answers developed, we'll push those out.
All right.
With that, I'll turn it back either to the superintendent or to Chair Haggard.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Nader and Superintendent Taylor. At this point, I know that there might be additional questions, but does anyone have any questions about the information that was shared today in response to any of these answers or anything like that? Mr. Hershey.
If we receive the average from the state, how much additional funding would that provide us as a school district?
The average that they provide per student across the
Yes.
state of North Carolina?
I did the math, I just want
We'll have to do
it
math.
be
We'll do the
said.
math. We can do that.
Oh, I want you guys to say it here, so people can
Okay.
hear how significant it is just getting an additional $800, let alone catching bigger districts throughout the country, what that is. And I'll just save you the time, it's about $109 million, which I know a lot could be for salaries, which would be fantastic. But I just want people to have a good understanding who are paying attention, the short end of the stick that we do get from the state, and we have for a long time, and the impact, the very real impact that has on us as a district and on real people who are in our schools teaching and doing the work. And I just wanted to highlight that, and I will continue to highlight that.
Yes.
Well, and if I could add a comment, Mr. Hershey.
Sure.
During the pandemic, with the federal relief funds that were allotted, they flowed to the state of North Carolina and then to the Department of Public Instruction, and they developed allotment formulas. They were also weighted, and Wake County received less per pupil than other districts as well, to your point.
That's it.
So if we could follow up on that, this is on page 27 of the document. It's the page 16 chart, the per pupil comparison. So I appreciate the additional context and some of the rewording that you provided. But I still have a question, because we say the primary reason for the difference, and this would explain the rankings, would be that there's additional supplemental funding for small county and low wealth districts. But then the chart that we look at provides the largest 5 North Carolina districts, and none of those districts are small nor rural.
Yeah.
So, okay, so what's the difference there? Why does Wake County fall below Charlotte, Mecklenburg, Cumberland, Forsyth, and some of those others?
That was my question.
I believe they also look at the county's capacity to fund the district, and I don't know exactly what works into their formula for that, but an assumption might be that they look at the current county appropriations.
It will also depend, a lot of our state budget is for people, and we receive position allotments for positions for people. So the experience level of staff will drive whether salaries are higher in a district or lower. Even if you've got the same amount of months of employment, and where we are in the state, that data could vary. This is per pupil spending, so it's not per pupil budget, per pupil expenditure. So it also depends on how districts spend their resources. There is carryover for a few categories that can influence the number, not significantly, but slightly. Textbooks and some technology funds carry over, and that could be influenced. The transportation allocation is based on a complicated bunch of variables, and so that would be difficult to compare district to district. So there's probably a lot of reasons, but the big ones are the low wealth and small.
And I appreciate that. I'm just trying to figure out, even like a modest difference in some of these, when you carry that difference in spending per pupil out to the 150, 160,000 pupils we have, can make a big, big difference. So, Ms. Mahaffey?
I mean, this is just, I'm curious, and this would be maybe a big ask for this year, but perhaps looking forward for future years. If we look at our per pupil, like how much of that money goes where, right? We have that pie chart from the beginning showing where all of our money goes within the district. But, how much of that, $6,897 goes, and sometimes breaking it down into small numbers can help people digest it easier, because I know Ms. Johnson-Hostler has said, this isn't a household budget. My household budget will never look like this, but it can help people understand the smaller numbers better. So where does that appropriation, or, the full total of whatever it is, go? And I realize that that's a big ask for this year, but perhaps in future years it can help people understand just how little, right? Like when you hear that the dollar amount that we have for instructional materials is about $30 per student, anybody who's bought an academic textbook can go, that's not enough. So, again, we're just trying to be more transparent with the public. That just kind of spurred that thought.
That makes a lot of sense. Ms. Russ, did you have something to add to
Yeah,
that?
I just piggybacking off Ms. McGaffey, this note that I wrote here too, just moving forward to transparency with creating the budget as it's being prepared would kind of be helpful to public to share, whether it's conversations at this table or however it might be happening within your departments, but just the transparency of how we're preparing the budget, kind of like what Ms. Happy is saying, and what goes into it and what makes you decide that, and just with sharing with community as it's being done. I think it supports us as a district to be able to say, well, they showed us what it is, and it allows public to say, hey, let's get behind this a little bit more and put pressure in other areas.
So Ms. Rice and Ms. Mahaffey, I absolutely appreciate that, because these budgets are so complicated. When we take the opportunity to share with people what goes into these numbers and take the time to explain that, then they understand the difference between how a state formula is put together and how that impacts a Wake County. And Chair Hagerty, you brought it out when you say, well, what is the difference between us and a Charlotte-Mecklenburg? And so we understand that if the state pays for a state 01 teacher, a 20-year person versus a 30-year person, that ends up being a different number, but the state is going to pay it, and that calculates into that local number. So I think the more we can do to get people to understand how the state formulas impact us, and ultimately districts that can do better are really penalized by the state, and that's not really fair. And so we do want people to know and understand what these numbers are, and so we will certainly add more and more transparency to answer those questions that may come up by people in the community.
Thank you. Vice Chair Johnson-Hostler?
Yes, just an addition to that, which, again, I always appreciate Ms. Kimsey and her level of detail. So you can take what I say and say it's a very long footnote. But I do think this conversation is important because when people look at this, they assume it's apples to apples. And I mean, even if we, right, like it's far more complicated. So not just the way the state decides its formula, but also to Ms. Kimsey's point that we also all could be spending our money differently. And again, I feel like if we don't acknowledge that, then we're going to get dinged on the back end for trying to compare apples to apples and not saying transparently, this isn't apples to apples. This is the data that each county reports. And this is how we're ranking them, but we can't speak and articulate that these are apples to apples. And I just think that that's necessary to say because, again, when you talk about advocacy, we also want to be giving our advocates the appropriate information. And, we all are a phone call or email away to say, how do you spend your money? And if it's very different, and we aren't articulating that outside of this table, because again, I will always be the reminder voice that most people are not watching us, people don't pay attention until they need it. And I'm concerned if we don't lift this up in a very public way, which is not at this table, it's how we articulate things in writing, is misleading. And I see David has his hand up.
Well, I was just going to share, Ms. Johnson-Hostler, one example of how we do spend our funding differently. Wake County, through the board's approval, reinstated master's pay for
That's what I'm saying.
teachers that were not grandfathered. And there's an additional request for funding because as we hire new teachers that would not be grandfathered with masters, we want to continue to pay that differential. We also have one of the highest salary supplements that's locally funded. Chapel Hill has one comparable, Charlotte Meck. But again, we're near the top of all districts, so to your point.
And I guess that's exactly what I'm saying, right? That's important for people to know. We have the most nationally board certified teachers. We tend to have teachers who stay with us much longer because our supplement is higher. All of those are things that I think are important for people to know in their advocacy efforts. And so you outlined them. That's why I led with, this is a very long footnote. But one that I think is important because it speaks to the commitment that this district has made to our teachers, especially at a time where we're, for the last couple of years, been very clear that this takes our entire community to be advocating for state level funding. And I think part of that is giving people the right information to say, yes, Wake is large, yes, our county has been more than gracious to us, and our salary supplement is high. In addition to that, here are the things that Wake does in lieu of the state not doing those things like master's pay. So again, I just think it's a long footnote, but I think it's a footnote that's important for advocacy efforts.
And without that, you could see somebody going, well, this isn't apples to apples,
right.
and easily dismiss what we're trying
Absolutely.
to convey.
And I think the reason why we're not apples to apples is because of our commitment and the choices that we have made have been to our people. And I just think it's helpful if people can say that in layman's terms.
I think one thing that would be interesting is we try to make these comparisons. We look at our expenditure per pupil, and that's an expenditure based over what period of time. If you looked at what the expense was per day per pupil, I think it would surprise and shock a lot of people.
That's a really good point.
At the product we're delivering for that. So,
I mean, you're right, we could go into the number of students that we have that are spec ed or AIG, right? Those are costs that we're accruing that don't actually show up in our apples to apples.
that's right. That's right. All right, so are there any other questions just about this presentation? I know you might have some new questions. Ms. Kimsey said they'll work on bringing answers for those questions at our next work session. None? Okay. At this point, what I'd like to do is just sort of go around. I appreciate all the work everyone did to come up with these questions. I know that several of you have had just maybe larger policy questions about the proposed budget, some initial reactions to it. Do you all have anything right now you would like to discuss in terms of directions, in terms of other things that you would like the staff to look at, and bringing us back more information for our next work session. Not a large queue of questions lining up, but I'll say, for example, I know that some of you have talked to me with concerns about staff compensation. And I think if you look at the materials that our staff has put together here, you can see maybe what some of the costs would be to provide additional compensation. And so one of the things to look at might be, are we prepared to move forward with additional compensation beyond what the superintendent has recommended? If we are, would we be adding that to our board budget, or would we be looking to make other changes or shifts where we prioritize that staff compensation maybe over some other programs that we hope to expand? And maybe we would expand in future years, but may not be part of this year's budget. Does that sound like an exercise that you think would be productive?
A very difficult one, but necessary.
Yeah.
As long as there are no cuts involved.
Oh, I've got lots to do.
No.
Well, I'd open it up for any conversation you'd like to have, but then also knowing that you may not be prepared right now to put something very specific, I would just invite you to share with staff particular scenarios you'd like to see explored, and so that then when we come back to our next work session, they can be prepared to show you kind of what the impacts of any proposed changes might be. Mr. Nader?
If I could just level set before that discussion takes place, reconfirm what is included in the board's proposed budget. As Ms. Kimsey shared, it's everything that was in the second year of the state's biennial budget that was legislated about employee compensation, which for Class 5 staff was a 3% increase. As Ms. Kimsey shared during the Q&A presentation, that 3% increase would bring the $17 an hour minimum hourly wage up to, was it $17.26? And then each step above that in each grade would still have those step and grade differentials. It would give school leadership a 3% increase. It would give the teachers a step increase, and an average 3%, but those teachers on lower steps would see a much higher than 3% increase. And then as they advance in steps, some lower than a 3% increase. And one of the things, many things in that addendum number 4 that was presented includes additional compensation, including one thing we initially had didn't make the final cut into what was in the proposed budget of not just an increase to overall teacher supplement, but in addition, increasing those higher steps. So I just share that kind of as background of what's already baked into the proposed budget.
And so, Mr. Nieder, if you could, just take a minute and explain the reasoning behind the difference in the step pay, because not everyone might have the background in that. What are we doing compared differently than what would be coming to us in the state mandated salaries regarding like employee steps for some of those veteran and later longer serving teachers?
Yes, and we can include this in your next set of Q&A, an actual schedule for teachers. There are multiple schedules, but there's steps, and the step is basically a year of experience. So a new teacher would be starting at step 0. At the end of that year, we go to step 1, and so on and so forth. And there are gradual increases in the state amount per step that is paid. In addition, the board uses local funding to pay a salary supplement, and that's the supplement I shared a few minutes ago. That our supplement is one of the highest supplements in the state. That is a fixed dollar supplement. What we have been doing for the last several years is increasing the fixed dollar amount by 8%. in this year's proposed budget, there currently is no increase to that fixed dollar amount. But you do have in your gray columns on that addendum number 4, what it would cost to increase those fixed dollar supplements by 4.5%, as well as what the investment would be to impact the steps, I believe, beginning at 15 or 16. 16. The state steps, one of the challenges is from step 0 to 15, there increases year over year. But then there are these 2 sets of plateaus that go for 10 years where there is no increase year over year. Now, what is in the current existing supplement schedule, there are some variations to address that. So there still would be some increases. But again, it's only in the supplement amount, not in the state base. And the state base does make up the majority of the 2.
Okay, and I appreciate it because that's where I'm just trying to get some clarity. Because, remember, we had set out a couple years ago that we were going to have 4 priority areas for a multi-year plan. And this year, as explained, with the mandated increases from the state budget, and then with the funds required to transfer a lot of positions from ESSER funding, we've said that we're not able to fund a lot of those priorities to the level that we had planned, like the maintenance and operation formula adjustment, behavioral health supports, although we do have behavioral health supported in some of the ESSER positions that we're trying to retain, the instructional support technicians. So then in regards to employee compensation, I just want to make sure that I understand it and everyone here understands. When we talk about the state mandated increases that are included in the superintendent's budget, do those, and I think I heard the answer, but I just want to be clear. Are those increases, do those increases just mirror the state increases, or do they provide those supplemental step increases that you just talked about in the superintendent's proposed budget?
What is included in the proposed budget mirrors what is included in the state legislation. And the state said classified staff will get a 3% increase. So that is in the proposed budget. Teachers will see a step increase and go to a new schedule. That local funding that would be required to support that is included in the proposed budget. But going back, I guess, to tease your question out, Chair Haggerty, in the most recent past years, we've included above and beyond what's been in state legislation. So if the state maybe had a 3% increase, we've said we're going to do a 4% or a 4.5%. And in this year's proposal, we have not gone beyond what the state has done.
Okay. So,
but there still is an increase in legislation for every employee.
for every employee, even those that would be on that plateau?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Pretty much like a COLA, it's not a step increase.
Yeah. Is that clear to
So
everyone? Because it can be complicated.
AJ's like, let me help y'all.
I may not, but I'll try. Just the one point there is that the teachers who are on those plateau years, they may not see the state increase because they'll get their step, but their state pay on that next step down is the same as it was. Now, with our local supplement, they may see a small increase when you look at both of those together, but when you talk about state legislated, there will be some plateaus there.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Nieder. So if everyone's clear on that? All right. Any other questions at this point or any other comments? Mr. Swanson?
So I know this is and I was wrestling whether to say this now or wait, and I'll send this an email to follow up, but I know this is a tough budget cycle, and there's things that we have to make tough choices, but looking at this, and I do feel that with the cost of living increasing and with inflation the way it is, the 3% from the state is not enough, and I'm concerned that we're going to lose teachers and staff because of this. The state not doing their due diligence. So I just have a hypothetical. What would it look like, if we prioritize those building subs in Title I low-performing schools, our high-performing schools, and move the rest of those dollars to increase potential compensation? And, the 2.5 that is there for the after-school care, what would that look like if it just went to compensation for bus drivers? So if the problem is we don't have the drivers, can we invest that money in the salaries to get the students to and from school versus putting this on as a temporary filling in the gap? So those are the two proposals that I would like to just see some more data to. And if there's ways to then phase the building subs, each cycle back to the full capacity, I could support that. But I just want to know if we were to prioritize, the schools that are using the most, what would that look like? And, with those building subs, we know that we're still losing teachers. One building sub is not going to be enough to cover all of these absences. Is there opportunities to compensate teachers that are having to step up and cover those classes? So just kind of seeing what that would look like.
Okay. Mr. Nutter or Superintendent?
And we can certainly come back and cost out, if you will, different scenarios. But with what you got in that addendum number 4, you can do some of that. And one of the reasons we put that together is so you could sort of work through it. If we didn't do this, it's going to save X dollars, and if we want to do that, it's going to cost Y dollars. So you've got some, as you look through that spreadsheet, you can do some of that assessment.
So it sounds like we have some good tools, and I appreciate Mr. Swanson bringing those because, I've had some of the similar thoughts. If the reason that we have the after-school program is driven by the bus driver shortage, but we're spending this amount of money on the after-school program, if that was redirected toward bus drivers, could that help to alleviate the shortage, and then we wouldn't necessarily need the program?
And to that point, what is the return of investment? Are we seeing significant gains in academic performance? If not, let's shift and go that route. But those are just pieces, and I understand the scenario at the thing, but some folks are visual learners, and I don't have a degree in business
Almost got an
administration
MPA.
Well, yes.
I couldn't help it.
But being I would not feel comfortable playing with those numbers because, again, this isn't our personal household budget. So I would love to see those scenarios laid out. And I understand, I appreciate this diagram. I think just making it where we can see it would be better. So,
And so that's kind of what we kind of adjusted and looked at as well. So when you think about the $2.5 million for extended care, that is absolutely an area where you can choose not to do that and put that in any compensation area that you choose, and it doesn't necessarily impact in a negative way. And so what we know is that those kids are going to be there. They're going to have to be attended by someone. So that will more than likely be the administration or certified teachers. In any case where we would use classified staff, we'd be encouraged not to do it because they would still get comp time that we will eventually have to pay for. And so if you decide to take that, put that compensation towards bus drivers, put it towards teacher compensation, whatever the case may be, you absolutely have the flexibility to do that. When we looked at the substitutes, what we had discussed is that do we put in a formula in terms of an equity formula for the next year? That's what we wanted to do. Instead of sort of shocking the system now, we allow everybody to retain it. But then we say the next year we will go to a formula-based distribution that may impact. Something that you can do now. We can absolutely say we can make adjustments to that based on school need. We know that, what is the vacancy rate now about for the substitutes, the permanent
Remember what it is? I don't know.
Okay. And so that's one of the things in terms of an adjustment. We'll have those numbers for you that hypothetically if the vacancy rate is 15%, I'm just making up a number, that means that 85% are people that you could retain and you don't have to go in through any kind of reduction in force that has that impact. The vacancy rate may be 25%. Whatever that number is, you can say, let's take those dollars and redirect those somewhere else. And then as we move forward, adjust that formula in terms of how we do it. So those are the kinds of things that we wanted to put here so you did have the flexibility to make those decisions. So let's make sure we bring that back the next time to have an idea of that vacancy rate is.
If we can do that, it's difficult, and that I want to remind y'all, we budget the money tight to what's filled. So when I showed that it's going to be $7.5 million for building subs, if every one of them were filled, it would cost more. So there's
No,
maybe a
we're
tiny
pretty
bit of
close to
room,
it.
but it's, yeah. So, yeah,
Thank you, Ms.
we will
Kinsey.
go.
Other comments and questions? I saw Ms. Edmonds and then Ms. Mahaffey.
Thank you. I think I'm going to save some stuff to comment either tonight during board member comments or next meeting, but I've already been public via email with several educators that have contacted me. I cannot support this budget in its current state because of the lack of the increase in the supplement. I'm not prepared today to say what my suggestion is, what my proposal is of where to move money. I completely agree, and I'm very interested in what Mr. Swanson suggested. I am also, quite frankly, interested in raising the ask. Not by a lot, but our duty as board members to the Wake County Public School System is to ask for what we need. And the mechanism that we have to do that beyond advocating at the state level through a lobbyist or through our own interactions with our state delegation is to tell the county commissioners what our students and our educators need. And that's what we need to do. I'm going to hold other comments about the lack of state support for later, either tonight or next meeting.
Thank you, Ms. Edmonds. And again, there are some things that we can look at, some that don't give us hope, and then some that maybe do. We have seen some recognitions now that even in the legislature, they realize that these salaries are not competitive with other states. It's always a tough situation when you have a body that makes these decisions and we don't have revenue generation of our own. If you talk about asking for what we need, if we're $5,000 per pupil below the national average, that's not even the top, right? That's like number 25. You take that 5,000 divided by our 160, and you're talking about $800 million just to get us up to the midpoint. It's what we're able to do and produce, and the results we get with the dollars that are provided to us is a real testament to our staff and everybody in our community. You are right that we need more money regardless of the source. So thank you for raising that.
If I may, as the public is listening and media is listening, I don't think it's appropriate to go to the commissioners with $92 million. So I'm looking at the number that's in the gray column, and by no means am I suggesting that, but I'm interested in raising the ask slightly in combination with making adjustments such as the ones suggested by Mr. Swanson, and then I simply need more time with this. I have thought about it the last 2 weeks, since it was presented to us, but this is more helpful for me to keep going with, what I might suggest.
All right, thank you. Before is it directly related to this one, Mr. Nieder, or do you want to hear from another board member first? Okay. Ms. Mahaffey?
We knew when the ESSER dollars came that this budget with the transition was going to be hard. I think our finance team, Ms. Kimsey, Mr. Nieder, Ms. Posey, and, prior to that, Mr. Winters were very upfront of what that was going to look like. That being said, when it's in front of you, it's a very different story than when it's a year or 2 or 3 down the road. So first I want to thank you for that preparation, because I think we tried to mitigate some of what we're seeing in front of us last year in our budget ask to the commissioners. And, recognizing that when in 2020 we didn't make an ask to the commissioners because we had no clue what was coming. So we've been flexible with these pieces. And I just want to take a moment and thank you guys for the work that you've done to prepare us for this. knowing all of those things. We also have a multi-year funding plan commitment, which has mainly been focused on compensation. And I think we can find ways to continue to honor that commitment. Because as much as I would love for the state to come and raise teacher pay, in the 8 years that I've been sitting in this chair, I'm not holding out much hope for that, and that's sad. We're number one in business. Businesses are coming specifically to this area, and when you talk to folks in economic development, it's because it is quality of life, and a lot of it has to do with how are the schools. You can't be number one in business and have bad schools. Mr. Swanson's comment raised a question that I had as far as planning time and coverage for teachers. I know that we, on occasion, will offer, especially our secondary teachers, extended planning time, where their planning time goes, I'm looking at Dr. Matillo, just relying on his principal experience, and because you're right there, I could have said Mr. Cook. I'm not putting just you on the spot, but our former principals.
Mr. Cook.
Yeah. But we do offer, if a teacher has to cover 4 classes, for example, in a high school, compensation so that their planning time can be outside of the school day. Is there a way that that could be done on a per diem level? Like if I have to use my planning time to cover Ms. Johnson-Hostler's class? Or is the reporting structure required just a bit too hard to create? Because I do think our teachers are being asked much more now than ever to cover classes because somebody is out. And I don't want somebody to feel resentful to their colleagues because they need to go see a doctor or because they need to deal with a family issue. But I'm curious what that may look like. I realize that that may not be a question for this budget process, but it's certainly a question that can impact this budget process as we look and see what that may look like as far as a reporting structure for that. I know it's not used often, but I do know that we have in the past used something like that.
All right. Ms. Caulfield?
Thank you, and thank you for all the work that you put in here. I know my questions are going to be answered at the next session, so thank you for that. As we're kind of talking about all of this, for me, our teachers, the HVAC problems that we had last year are really, they've moved to the top for me as far as the priority goes. When I hear that we don't have money for helps, that kind of is just not sitting well with me. We know that the program works. It's been around for a long time. We were using it for a year. I get that. It's something that all of our families have been struggling with is, the proficiency there. So for me, the budget, I was hoping to see a little bit, and I know that we're digging and we're trying to move things around, so I don't want to dismiss that at all. But I would really like to see a little bit more options, like what you're saying. That was one of the questions that I had is, rather than putting a Band-Aid on it and having somebody sit with the kids afterwards, which is important, and we need that, putting that money towards the bus drivers, which could solve the problem that we don't need that money. So it's really more a matter of, and this isn't really falling on staff, this is also falling on the board for us to make a decision where we want to prioritize our money. And 3% for our teachers, and I understand, the staff, I'm not sure that the state is ever going to give us everything that we want on a wish list. But it's still always going to be something that's going to lay in our lap. So for me, just having the 3%, I worry that we're going to lose more staff if we're not showing them how much we support them. If that means getting the helps in there to support our families, if that means more than the 3% or something that we can do for our teachers, especially the ones that are sitting at that plateau level. We need them to support our younger teachers. So I'm just really worried that we're not putting more funds towards that. Like I said, I don't know where it'll come from. Obviously, we're going to be squeezing it from somewhere to stick it somewhere else, but those are things that actually move up to the top for me. And the Learning Lab thing, or it's expanded learning now, right? I think is the new name for it. It's, for me, that is a perfect example of could we use the funds better in a different way. So that's just, and I know you're still going to answer my questions that I had put in there, so I'll wait for that. But just putting some feedback in there, I just really wish that we could put more emphasis on our teachers and some of the areas we're struggling, CNS and HVAC. That's more of a priority for me. I mean, we're hiring some other new positions. I know you mentioned 3 HR positions. I saw there were some other, like the coaches and stuff like that. Those are kind of new things that we have, and we still don't have the money we need for what is sitting here in front of us. So that's just more of a comment than a question.
No, I appreciate that. That's the kind of feedback that we're looking for as we work on coming up with the board's budget. One thing to clarify, though, the HELPS funding, are we eliminating the HELPS funding, or are we just saying we don't need to ask for it locally because we could get it out of federal funding?
We're saying we don't believe we need to ask for it locally because we think we'll be able to pay for it with some carryover from some of our grants. Did you want to have more permission?
No.
Okay. I just
So it
wanted-
will continue.
We
Yes.
believe we can do it from carryover.
Okay. So I'd like that believed to be yes.
I know, I'm not the one that,
I feel like the hard yes votes.
Yes.
So I'll just emphasize,
says yes.
we're committed to continuing that program, and I would point out, in the 2 years of the program, it's not been a recurring budget item, and so we have found the means to be able to fund it, and we will continue to do so in 24-25.
We recorded this, Drew.
Thank you.
We appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Ms. Edmonds, did you have something to add? And then I'll...
I did. I wanted to,
Ms. Rice, then Ms. Johnson, I'll slide.
Ms. Caulfield, to your point about the state giving us, everything we want, and, they may never will. I just want for those listening to understand that North Carolina is 48th in funding effort as far as education. So what we take of our state budget and invest in public education, we are near the bottom and have been for many years now. In addition to that, our state leaders have decided rather to invest in private school vouchers at hundreds of millions of dollars per year, instead of investing in public schools. So I don't need them to give me everything that I have on my wish list, but to get us going in the right direction to the national average, toward the national average, both in funding effort and to prioritize public education instead of private education, that's what I'm looking for. And the public needs to understand that.
Ms. Rice?
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for working on the budget. I agree with Ms. Edmonds, but I want to continue to express my concern as well around, and I've expressed it in other ways, around teacher funding. But for me, the issue around teacher funding is about the well-being of our staff. Not just their occupational well-being, but their financial well-being of their own lives, which spills over into, what am I going to talk about, dimensions of wellness, right? And so if they can't focus, and I don't know about anybody else, if I look at my own household budget or whatever, and if something impacts that I can't expand my income or my revenue in my own home budget, I can't focus a lot on other things that are going on around me. And I think that's just human nature, right? And so my concern is the well-being of our staff, which then impacts the well-being of our students, which then overall impacts student achievement. And so if teachers have to think about they've got to go to the second and third job, or they're thinking about an extra copay that's due to take their own child to the doctor, while another child is needing them in front of them, they're human. They're not superhumans. They're humans, and we have to do what is most necessary as we, as a system of educators, all took Psych 101, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If they can't feel safe, how can we help or expect them to help our students feel safe. And if they're stressed and worried about everything they have to do, how can they really effectively help our students? And they've been doing an outstanding job with what minimal resources they have had so far. But wait, yes, we have a lot going on. There's a lot in the budget. The fortunate thing is yes, we are a little bit better off than other counties. Yes, we are a little bit better off that other teachers want to come into our county. But I'm really concerned that if we don't support our teachers, it is a larger issue that's a ripple effect than anything else. And that's their emotional well-being, to take care of their finances, which spills over into our children. And I think a lot of times we forget the humanity of the thing. And I just don't want us at the table to forget the humanity of these people that come to school every single day to deal with our children on all spectrums of their own lifestyles and behaviors, right? And we talk about wellness, and we look at our children who are unfortunately no longer with us because of the pressures of today. And so I know I'm going to stop, but I really want that to be understood, that that is something that is bothering me in my core, that I feel is alarming me on the inside, that if we don't make it understood through our actions that they matter, who is going to take care of the children emotionally and academically if we don't take care of our teachers in the same way? Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chair Johnson-Hostler.
Yes, just very briefly, I think for me, it's important that the superintendent and the staff here, from all of our board members, which I think you have, except for me, and I think the chair has sort of been clear. At the end of the day, I'm not going to support this budget without the increase of pay. I mean, at the end of the day, our people, we don't have a school district without the people. And my favorite meme is Mr. Swanson and I say, is we say we have one job. Well, we also have one job, and that is to ensure that we actually have the people in the building to provide the education to our students. That's our job. So I just wanted to make sure that you all knew that, I mean, we certainly have at least 5 people who are saying, it ain't personal, but at the end of the day, that is our job to make the hard decision, and the hard decision is, for me, is to support our people.
Thank you. I was going to make that the final word, but I see 2 more hands.
I knew you couldn't help it.
I just wanted to know if I was one of the 5, because if not, then I'm
You
6.
are.
Okay.
Yeah. The only person I hadn't heard from was Chris, so I just didn't want to count, and Cheryl came
So
in.
that everyone.
Yeah, no, I think all of you, again, when we started the conversation, I didn't know where it would lead, but I wanted to have this discussion at the board table, because I know every board member that I've talked to about this has expressed the same sentiments, that we want a budget that reflects our priorities, and our priorities are taking care of our staff and the professionals that are, with our children, taking care of our children every day. So I think that's come through loud and clear. I know we'll have to make some tough choices and some tough decisions, because, this money has to come from somewhere. But I appreciate the guidance, and I really do. I want to thank staff, because the information that you've provided, especially with all of these options, showing different things, what the budget impacts could be, is probably the most detailed information I received in like 5 or 6 years of being on the board. And when you put it out there, you can see we can't fund everything, but when we see what things do cost, we can come together and make those tough decisions to come out with a budget that really reflects what we want to do as a group. So thank you. Ms. Mahaffey?
Well, I just sent the question of what has our ask versus what we've received look like for the past 10 years. And obviously that can't get answered right here, right now. But last year's ask was $55.8 million, and I believe 35 of that, if I've got my numbers correct, was to supplement the ESSER piece. So it's not unheard of that we don't ask for additional funding based on, because honestly, most of this budget is maintaining our current level of service. And I think we absolutely have to maintain our current level of service, but we also have to take care of our people, because we know that the current level of service is not doing that. And so I just think it's important to highlight that. And, this is a very well put together budget.
Yes.
And, I appreciate Ms. Edmonds saying, if it takes a little more on our part as a board, that's a decision that we're going to have to wrestle with as board members.
I should clarify, that I'm not co-signing on that,
Oh,
right?
no.
Because for me, at the end of the day, we also have a lot of teachers who can't afford to live in our county, and it would be remiss of me not to say at this board table, when we talk about an increase, let's be clear, we're also talking about they're paying on the back end. When we built Willow Spring High School, the number of teachers who don't live in Wake County is astronomical. So I just think it's important to not be dismayed that there is a negative outcome and consequences to people who aren't us sitting at this table, who even if we increase their pay by 4% are leaving the district, because those are our younger teachers who are getting the increase. You know why? Because they can't afford to live here, and there's no increase that's going to allow them to have stable housing. And at the end of the day, that is what we're up against. So I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I'm saying I'm going to ask for greater than the superintendent. I am saying it's my job to make hard decisions, and I'm clear that the hard decisions mean I have to acknowledge that there are a large number of our educators who can't afford to live in this county. So any ask we make, I'm also clear, I'm also potentially asking to raise their taxes.
And folks are struggling with that as well.
They are.
So I'm with you.
It's the number one ask in this county is housing. Lack of affordable housing and the lack of funding to support that.
And the article in another came out that you had to
That's
pay
right.
$102,000 just to live comfortably here in Raleigh. And we know that there's a teacher, an instructional assistant, an hourly employee that does not make nowhere near that. So I agree, and I cannot support increasing that ask. But I can support making tough decisions.
That's right.
And looking at things that may not need to be funded this year and potentially looking at it long term. So that is what I am on board, but I could not increase this ask any more than what it is. I'm sorry for going out of turn.
No.
I'm glad I said something, so that could be very well clarified. So
And that's
thank
good,
you.
because this, again, helps
Yeah.
board members understand where their colleagues and their peers are and what those tough conversations are. And, I know we keep adding one more last statement, but Mr. Swanson makes a really good point, which is that it's, we look at these decisions in immediate isolation of what we're asking for now, but they are long-term decisions, and what we can do now is part of something larger, like that's what some of the rationale behind the multi-year plan was, so that when we go to our commissioners, we're not bringing them a budget with a large sticker shock attached to it, but rather we're trying to show them progression toward a goal. And I know one of the things Dr. Taylor has talked about coming in, he's been here, he got through his first 100 days, we didn't run him off, but there, I'm sure there's a lot of changes or a lot of things that he'd like to do to help us, move forward in our strategic plan. And we're not going to accomplish all of them in one budget. And so with the ESSER transition and opening all of these new schools, we might be limited in what we can do now. But then I'm also going to be really excited to see where he wants to go from here and what changes those might be. A lot of the things that we've talked about that are other priorities of ours beyond staff compensation in terms of specifically directing dollars towards students with the highest needs, bringing test scores up, addressing growth and performance. We'll see that come, but we're not going to be able to accomplish all of that in one budget.
And I'll say there's sticker shock nearly every year, but the multi-year plan was so we weren't surprising anybody.
That's right. Dr. Taylor, any final, Ms. Caulfield, and then Dr.
I
Taylor.
just to add, like, food for thought, and I did ask, so I think that is something that hopefully will come, like what our history is of asking, because if we're just keep asking for more and more money, and I understand you're passionate about the vouchers, and I get it, I hear what you're saying, but we've kind of always been asking for more money and not exactly where we wanted to be. I understand what you're saying, but I'm just saying, historically speaking, overlooking at it, we just keep putting more and more money on it, and if we're not fixing the foundation and the base, we just keep adding to the top. It's just Band-Aids. So what I'm just saying, I don't really support just keep asking for more money. And it might be uncomfortable, and I don't know if this is an option that we have discussed, is cutting some things out. I mean, that's something that realistically in my life, when you can't afford something, you got to turn around and say, well, you know what, we can't do this anymore. We need to take this away. This one's moved to the top priority over that. And it's uncomfortable, but that might be something. We're losing our ESSER funds, but that wasn't always there in the past.
That's right.
It's something that kind of gave us a big Band-Aid in the meantime, and now it's gone, so now we have to dig a little bit deeper. So I don't actually support asking for more money.
But those are some of the tough decisions that we're talking about, and we need to be able to talk about the pros and the cons. And Mr. Nieder, I think I saw when you presented the budget, the superintendent's budget, at our last meeting, I mean, we have about $35 million or so in cuts. It's just that our needs, new needs exceeded even what we've already cut. And if not for those cuts, it could have been an even more dire situation.
Yes, and some of the revenues are projected to come in lower. That's the kind of the opposite side of the request to increase, because when the revenues go down, what we're already spending has to somehow be accounted for. And if I could perhaps just, as the board is maybe pulling the work session towards a close, remind the board as you think forward and as you work forward that this is going to be an iterative process, and the timing based upon things, and I'll give you the scenario, the board will need to, based on state statute, have a final proposed budget approved before we will know what the state budget will be for this coming year. So wherever the board winds up with, for example, with staff compensation that is included in what will become the board's proposed budget, it's possible that the state may change what's in their second year of the biennial budget, may make increases. But even that, after the state has its budget, the county, with whatever request is in the board's proposed budget, the commissioners will have to make a decision as to whether they fund your request fully or not. And so there are going to be iterations after iterations, and there's reconciliations that have to be done. And then ultimately, after the state budget is established, we will look at all the revenues available. What are we required to do based upon final state legislation, which we don't know right now. Everything in the budget is based upon what was developed in the long session, but they can come back and make changes. So it's going to be, my point is, an iterative process.
And so with that, I'll just end with these parting words that, first of all, it's great to hear this conversation from everyone, and this is what not only we as administration needs to hear, but we want the public to hear this as well. Ms. Mahaffey, I do know that I think there's a chart where we had the 5-year history of what we
Right,
asked.
which is why I said 10.
Yeah, and so we'll be able to go back and do the 10 years and get that. I think what I want everybody to understand is what I see is going back to things that we may have to cut out of the budget. And David will appreciate this, that one of the things that I'm looking at that I know we will have to address is the idea of extra versus excess. And so when I look at where Wake County is, we provide extra, and we should always do that for the purpose that we know. But then we also have to look and determine where have we actually put in excess that we could take away and redirect somewhere else. And so we know that takes time, but that is absolutely one of the things that we always want to address, is looking at the extra versus the excess, and then making those tough decisions, as you said. I also know that this budget process and everything that we want to do is both, it's long, medium, and short. And so the short term is what we believe is the right ask. And I've said to you all 100% that I work for the board. I make recommendations. You will make that ask. And it's up to commissioners to decide what they fund. That is the short part. The medium part, I do believe, is the transparency that we have with our community to say that if we desire these things in our community and it's going to require additional revenue, then we need them to understand that, so they can have those conversations with the commissioners who are now more willing to make those decisions to raise revenue. And I know much of what they do is based on what they believe the public wants. We're number one in business. And we have to understand that our school district is a vital part of that. So we want to be able to have that conversation with our public so they can make informed decisions. And I know that the loan piece, that really is with the General Assembly. And so I don't understand how we can be number one in business as a state in 48 in teacher pay. You all know I was born and raised in Mississippi and I love it, but if we're below compensation in Mississippi, something is wrong. Something is wrong. And so they have to make that commitment. It is up to us as a state to get them to do that. But I do recognize that that is the long game. That is the long game. What we control is the medium and the short. And so obviously our job is to give you those recommendations where you can make changes in the short and make your final presentation to the commissioners. And I think David Nieder has said it best. Once all of that happens, the final budget probably won't be done until October. I think it was one of the first things I did when we came in. It was finalizing the budget and the reconciliation process. And so we appreciate the feedback. We know how very difficult this is, and everything does come down to what we ask versus what we're finally given in making that reconciliation. And I know it is about people. At the end of the day, wherever we land, my responsibility is to make sure that we come into budget. And so that means that whatever decisions you make as a board, when we get final numbers, I will always come to you and say, you can switch anything that you want to switch, but we're not leaving this room until we're within this budget, and I'll do whatever it is that you ask, but it has to be within these parameters. And so I think continuing to have these conversations as a board and having the public to listen to it, there's a lot that they can say in terms of what their expectations and wishes are. And we can always be open to that and always give us more information about the additional transparency that you want. I'm glad that you've gotten more information than you've ever gotten, but we also recognize there's more that you need. We're going to give it to you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Taylor. So I think this has been a productive work session. I think we've gotten a lot accomplished. We will have more to do before we get there to our final destination. Speaking of final destinations, we have an option right now. We can either call the work session to, okay, or we can move into closed session and try to move a few items off our agenda. So having heard a couple whispered ideas, is there a formal motion?
Motion to move into closed session for the reasons listed on the Board of Education meeting agenda for 5:30.
And I'll second.
All right, that's a motion from Ms. Mahaffey that we move into closed session for the statutory reasons cited in the board agenda. A second from Mr. Swanson. All in favor of moving into closed session, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. All right, we will take a moment to clear the room, and then we will begin our closed session. Thank you very much, everyone.